Hello and welcome to Gefet in the Daf. I'm Yael Shimoni, bringing to you together with Hadran and Yeshivat Drisha, learning Iyun and Iyur Bekiu Daf Yomi. And we've been away for a while, but we're very happy to return and learn with you, and finishing together with you the first Perek of Masechet Avodah Zarah. And here in Daf Chafbet, there are many Tosafotim, which are very interesting on the Daf. I want to learn with you one Tosafot, who will touch upon two different points. One, who are the Kutim, and also where we'll put much more time is a big machloket in between Baalei HaTosafot on Melacha and Chol HaMoed and lifnei iver lo titen michshol in Chol HaMoed. So these are really interesting. This is a very big, interesting, and fantastic machloket in Baalei HaTosafot. So I hope you'll enjoy that one. But in order to get to that, we have to learn a bit of Mishnah and a bit of Gemara. So let's sort of go in, and this will be a bit of a go over on a few dapim that you've already learned. So the Mishnah in Daf Chaf speaks about an Issur that we cannot rent houses and to goyim, to Avodah Kochavim in Israel, and sometimes also not abroad. So let's see what the Mishnah says. אין הם מזכירים להם בתים בארץ ישראל ואין צריך לומר שדות. ובסוריה מזכירים להם בתים אבל לא שדות, ובחוץ לארץ מוכרים להם בתים ומזכירים שדות, דברי רבי מאיר. So we see here three different places that we have different halachot in. We have Eretz Israel, we have Syria, which is the abroad, which is close to Eretz Israel. So Syria is very close to Israel, as you know. And Chutz La'aretz means much further away. It could be the States, it could be Bavel. And there are different halachot for each one, according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi is Cholek. But let's see what Rabbi Meir is saying, because this is what we need to understand what's happening later on in the Gemara. So why do we have different halachot here? Why aren't we allowed to rent a house to Avodah Kochavim in Eretz Israel? And why aren't we allowed to rent lands to them? So Rashi explains, he explains actually the next part of the Mishnah. He tries to explain why are we allowed to do that abroad. So it says Rashi, מזכירים להם בתים, ולא גזרינן עטו מחירה, דהינם מיעט על ידי מחירה, לא עבר הדאורייתא, וככתיב לא תיתן להם חן וחניה, בארץ ישראל כתיב דחשיבה חנייתה. So Rashi explains to us that the core of all these Issurim is Issur lo techonim, the Issur to give land to have a place in Eretz Israel for Avodah Zarah. And that's why you cannot sell a house in Eretz Israel or land to Avodah Zarah. So what kind of Issur do we have here? We're not talking about selling, we're talking about renting. Because it's Issur de Rabbanan Gzera Atu Mechira. We don't want you to rent because the Issur de Raita is to sell. So we're taking a step back and saying also don't rent. So that's why you don't rent anything in Israel, not houses and not lands. However, in Syria, we do rent houses, but we do not rent lands. Why? Says Rashi, the Rambam here, and Perushim Rambam says, what are tarta de Issura? לפי ששדות יש בהם שני עניינים, אחד משום לא תיכונים, ושני שהוא מבטל ממנו הפרשת התרומות ומעשרות. So the Rambam, when you're giving land, also renting land to somebody who is Oved Avodah Zarah, you won't get Trumot u'Ma'asrot there from the land. So lands, you have an extra problem, not only the problem of houses, but also the problem of Trumot u'Ma'asrot. And it sounds as if Trumot u'Ma'asrot, you do have to give in Syria. So that's a whole different issue that we won't go into. Now, if we go to abroad, far away, בחוץ לארץ, מוכרים להם בתים ומשכירים שדות. Why is that? So Rashi אומר, חוץ לארץ זה מרחק, לטה למיקסר מחירה דהת אמת ומחירה דארץ ישראל. Says Rashi, when you're abroad, really far away, let's say in the States, you can also sell a house. Why? You would think that there is a gezerah, if you can't sell a house in Eretz Israel, we'll also do gezerah de Rabbanan and say you can't sell a house when you're far away. But says Rashi, since it's so far, that's not worth doing a gezerah, so that's why even selling houses, it's okay. But renting, you can only rent lands and not sell lands. Why can't you sell lands? Because lands, you have two zerot on them. So that's why it's harder to open it up totally. So this is the beginning. We understood that there are two problems in land. You also mevatel trumot ha'maasrot in Eretz Yisrael, and there's lo techunim, and the places which are not Eretz Yisrael are affected by the dinei d'oraisa that you have in Eretz Yisrael. And if you're far away, you're not as affected for the dinei d'oraisa as you are when you're closer. So that's the Mishnah in Daf Chaf. Let's begin with the first point of this Gefet. Who are the Kutim? The Kutim will emerge momentarily in the sugya that we'll learn, and we'll try to understand who they are and what kind of relationship Jews had with them. Okay, so that is happening in Avodah Zarah Chaf Aleph Amud Bet. There, the Gemara dwells on the second part of the Mishnah, or maybe the last part of the Mishnah. So let's read that part of the Mishnah just to get our bearings going. אף במקום שאמרו להזכיר לא לבית דירה, אמרו מפני שהוא מכניס לתוכו עבודת כוכבים, שנאמר לו תביא תאהבה אל ביתך, ובכל מקום לא להזכיר לו את המרחב, מפני שהוא נקרא על שמו. So when we read the Mishnah, the first part of the Mishnah in Daf Chaf, we thought that when we're abroad, in Vel, in the States, you can always rent anything you want, houses or lands, to Avodat Kochavim. But here the Mishnah says that's not totally true. On houses, you still have two problems. What are the problems? First of all, you cannot rent your house to Avodat Kochavim because he will bring in Avodah Zarah to your house, and that is Issur, because you're not allowed to bring to'eva el bitecha. So what are you allowed to rent out? So according to the Mishnah, only places that are not for housing but are for working. So you can rent a space that will be for a supermarket or for a clerk. It's not a house. It won't bring his Avodah Zarah, but he could work from there, a working space, like we work. That's what you can do. But even then, not any kind of working space you can rent. What kind of renting space you can't rent? If you're just sharing a space, it's not really connected to your name. But if it's a merchatz, which means a spa, so it's a famous and a specific kind of land, and everybody knows it's my spa, even when I rent it out, there's a problem, says the Mishnah, because everybody knows it's Yael Shimoni's spa. So that's really unclear. What is the problem if it's known as my spa? I'm renting it out. What kind of problem is there? So here the Gemara explains to us this through two brises. The first brisa is a brisa of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel אומר, לא יזכור אדם מרחצו לעובד כוכבים מפני שנקרא על שמו, ועובד כוכבים זה עושה בו מלאכה בשבתות ובחגים. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, when I rent out a space, people don't really know what kind of relationship I have with the person who's now working in that workspace. And here we have to understand that there are three kinds of working deals that you can have with somebody. When somebody is working in your space, it could be that he's working for you. He's just your sachir. You want somebody to do the work for you. I have a spa. I want people to do massages for me. I don't know how to do it, so I rent it out. I'm not renting the space. I'm actually having people work for me. The work is for me. So if I have somebody who's Oved Kochavim, they can open on Shabbos, and people will think that what I did is I did not rent a space. They would think that this is still my space. This person is just working for me. You see, because if I have somebody who's Avodat Kochavim working in my spa, nobody knows what was written down. Is this rental of the area, and actually he's the one running the spa, or am I running the spa and he's working for me? So why is that problematic? Says Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, if it's Oved Kochavim and I rented out the space, he will open it up on Shabbos. But people don't know that the deal was space rental because this is my spa. And they'll assume that I did not rent it out. They'll assume that he's my worker, and then they will think that I am Mechalel Shabbos and Yom Tov. So that's the problem. Okay, so here we see the problem is actually Mishum Chashad, because people will think that I'm Mechalel Shabbos and Yom Tov, even though the truth is that I'm not, because I rented the space to him. But since it's not common to rent a space, it's more common, it's known by my name, people will assume it's still mine. They will assume that I'm Mechalel Shabbos, and they won't assume that I rented out the space. So that's what Rabbi Shimon said in the Brisa. The Gemara says, when we read Rabbi Shimon's Brisa carefully, we see that he spoke only about Avodah Kochavim. He did not speak about Kutim. Aval Kutim mai, says the Brisa, Sharei Kuti Eima Avid Melacha b'chulo shel moed anana mi'avdina. Says the Gemara, it is true that you can't give it to a Avodah Zarah, but you can give it to a Kuti. Why? Because Kutim will not work on Shabbos and Yom Tov. They will work on Chol HaMoed, but Chol HaMoed, also Jews can open up a spa on Chol HaMoed. Rashi explains to us who the Kuti is. And he says, Kuti, לא אביד מלאכה בשבת, אבל בחולו של מועד אביד, דלמדרש סופרים לא חייש. So Rashi here tells us a Kuti is a person who on one hand will not be Mechalel Shabbos, but on the other hand, he will be Mechalel Chol HaMoed, and we will be working on Chol HaMoed, because he does not believe in the drashot of Chachamim. And the Issur of Chol HaMoed is a drasha. Now, it's just very important to point out, a drasha doesn't mean something is the Rabbanit. A drasha sometimes is 100% d'oraisa. But here the Kutim just don't know the drashot of Chazal, so they don't believe in them. And that's why they don't go by them. So what did the Gemara say? Chol HaMoed, a Jew is not allowed to work on Chol HaMoed. But opening a spa on Chol HaMoed is mutar also for a Jew, because Chol HaMoed, Melacha Chol HaMoed, it's very, very interesting. It's a fluidic kind of Issur. There are some things that are Issur, there's some things that are mutar. For example, we'll see, what's Issur is to work in your land, but if you are really going to lose your crop, you are allowed to work. And on the other hand, there's some melachot that you're totally allowed to do, like washing, and therefore opening a spa is totally fine. So that's why the Gemara explains when Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said that you cannot rent out a spa to a goy. He said dafka oved avodat kochavim, but you can rent it out to a kuti. Now, of course, this is very interesting. How did these kutim come about? Who are these people who are not mechalel Shabbos and Yom Tov, but are mechalel chulo shel moed? So, if you want, you can read in Sefer Melachim. There's a description of the kutim that Issur, the king of Issur, when he took away the 10 tribes, he actually moved populations and populated the land of Israel up north with people who were from other lands, from Kutaya, and they became Jews, but halfway. Why halfway? Because they did not know the laws of the land, and therefore the animals of Israel were attacking them, so they begged to have somebody, a Kohen, teach them what the laws of the land were, and they actually became half of a Gerim. They were still working on Avodah Zarah, but they believed in God. That's what says in Sefer Melachim. And the Rambam and Perushim and the Mishnah and Masechet Brachot says that there was another point of involvement in the Kutim, that after they became these half of the Avodah Zarah, half believers in God, they actually learned Torah Shebichtav and became very, very, very religious in what they understood in the Torah. And says the Rambam, אלא שהלכו להם הימים עד שלמדו את התורה ופרשוה כפשוטה, ומצווה שהחזיקו בה היו מדקדקים בה ומחזיקים בה מאוד, והיו מוחזקים שהם מאמיני הדת. So at that point, Chazal looked at the Kutim and thought that they were much, much better than of the Avodah Zarah, because they actually stopped working on Avodah Zarah and they were doing the Torah Shebichtav, not Torah Shebe'al Peh, but Torah Shebichtav. And therefore, they were not considered of the Avodah Zarah. They're like some kind of gerim, somewhere in the middle. But continues the Rambam and says later on, it was found out that they still did work of Avodah Zarah, and then they declined again, not to become these special gerim, but they were rejudged as of the Avodah Zarah. So here in our sugya, it sounds as if we're talking about the Kutim in the middle. The Kutim when they were really regarded as gerim, as people who are doing Torah mitzvot, but maybe not all the way, and therefore we do trust them to do Torah mitzvot, and we'll see this returning in the continuation of the sugya. So let's go back to our Gemara. We're in Daf Chafbet Amud Aleph, and here continues the Gemara. It says, okay, we talked about Rashbag, who said that you cannot rent out a spot to Oved Avodat Kochavim, and we learned that you are allowed to rent out a spa to a Kuti. How about land? So continues the Gemara and says, Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar אומר, לא יזכיר שדהו לכותי, מפני שנקראת על שמו, וכותי זה עושה במלאכה בכל המועד. So here we see, even though you could rent out a spa to a kuti because you can open the spa on Chol HaMoed, you cannot rent out land because working on Chol HaMoed and the land, that's an Issur. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says fine, okay, a merchatz, a spa, you can rent to a kuti, but not land. So the same problem we had with the goy in the spa, that he would open up on Shabbos and Yom Tov and nobody would know it was his. They would think that I was actually paying his salary and he was a worker for me. The same problem we would have with a kuti in the land, because he would be working the land on Chol HaMoed, and people would think that it is not rented out to him, that he's actually my worker, and everybody knows it's my land, so they will be suspicious that I'm mechalel the kedusha of the moadim. So says the Gemara, okay, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said that it's a problem only with a kuti. But why didn't he say that it's also a problem with Avodah Kochavim? Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar was supposed to say, you can't rent out your land not to a kuti and not to Avodah Kochavim. Why is he only talking about kuti? Could it be that you are allowed to rent out land to Ovdei Avodat Kochavim? אבל Avodat Kochavim, mai? Shari, de'amri harisa harisuta avid. Says the Gemara, yeah, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar thinks that if you will rent it out to Oved Kochavim, people will not suspect you. Why? The Gemara says because people assume that when somebody is working on the land, that he is renting it. Why is that? Because it was common practice at that time, feudally, also up to medieval times. People who were working in the lands were not actually the owners of the land, but they would get the land to work it, and they would pay back from what they achieved by their work. That is called in Hebrew arisut. It is a kind of a rental contract. Instead of paying in advance for the land, you pay in what you grow out of it after you've already worked it out. That's called arisut. So says the Gemara, since this is land, everybody knows that probably it is not yours, and that's why this person is not working for you. This person actually is renting of the kind of aris, renting in order to work the land and give you percentage of what you grew there. So says the Gemara, wait, that's a great answer, but if that's the answer, so you should also be able to give it to a kuti, because people would also assume that he's also on this same rental contract of arisut. Says the Gemara, no, arisut ale Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel lately. Now he doesn't think that people will assume that he's doing this contract of arisut. So let's erase that. Let's move on to a different answer. Why would there be a difference between an Oved Kochavim to a Kuti? So, says the Gemara, Ela Oved Kochavim mai ta'am mutar, de'amrinan lei v'tzayet. Kuti, nami amrinan lei v'tzayet. Says the Gemara, the reason that you can give a land to an Oved Kochavim to rent, and you can't give it to a Kuti, because you can tell the Oved Kochavim, listen, I'm renting you this land, but I am giving in your rental contract that you're not allowed to work it on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Because I have this problem, people will suspect me, and he will honor the contract. Why? Because he says, okay, I understand you have a different religion, we'll go by you, you're the owner, I see that you don't work on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and therefore the contract will work well. But, says the Gemara, if you'll try to do that same contract with a kuti and tell him, I'm renting you the land only if you agree not to work on Chol HaMoed, he will not honor the contract. Why? Kuti nami amrinan levitzayit, kuti lo tzayet, says the Gemara, de'amar ana gamir natfei linach. The kuti is super religious, and if you'll try to do that contract with him, he'll say, I'm not honoring your contract because you don't understand halacha. There is no Issur, so you'll try to make the contract, but it would not be honored, and therefore he would be working the land of Chol HaMoed, and you would be suspected. So says the Gemara, wow, we understand that, but if that's true, there is a new problem with giving a Kuti land. If you know that if you rent to the Kuti this land, and he will work it on Chol HaMoed, you're actually being over avera av lifnei iver lo titen mishol. Rashi says, טיפוק ליה דבלא חשד נמי איכא משום לפני עיוור, וכותי גר הוא מצווה על המצוות כישראל, ולא דמי לעובד כוכבים העושה מלאכה בשבת, שעובדי כוכבים לא זרעו עליה. Says Rashi, if you rent a land to somebody who's עובד עבודה זרה, or just a non-Jew, okay, and you give him a contract and you tell him don't work on Shabbos v'Yom Tov, definitely the only problem you have there is if you won't honor the contract, people will suspect you. You don't have a problem that if you won't honor the contract that he's Mechal Shabbos and Yom Tov. Why? Because he's not Chayav in Shabbos and Yom Tov. So that's fine. But if you give land, you rent land to a Kuti, and you're also afraid that people will suspect you, but you should be afraid of something else. If he does not respect your contract, he will be over avera. And you gave him the land that allows him to be over the avera of Melacha b'Chol HaMoed. So the Braita should have said, the Mishnah should have said two problems. Not only chashad, but also, not only mipnei shenikrat al shmo, but also lifnei iver lo titen mishol. So how come the Mishnah didn't say lifnei iver lo titen mishol? Ihachi ma'irian mipnei shenikrat al shmo, says the Gemara. Typically, mishum iver lo titen mishol. Says the Gemara, an annoying maybe answer. Chada ve'od ka'amar. It is true that the Mishnah said mipnei shenikrat al shmo, but the truth is it's not the only reason. It's only one reason. The Mishnah agrees there are two problems with Kutim. חדה משום לפני עיוור, ועוד מפני שנקראת על שמו. Okay, so this is our sugya, and we learned a lot of things here. We learned that there's a sachir, there's a socher, there's an aris and an aris, and a socher. These are two different contexts of schirut, but then you're not the owner, and therefore if they're doing stuff, it's not your problem. The problem is that people suspect that they're your workers, that you're your schirim. And that was mishum chashad. And we also saw that kutim are people who, on one hand, they respect Torah, on the other hand, they don't respect the rules of Chazal, and therefore, if it's a kuti, he would be working on Chol HaMoed, and that would be a problem on lifnei iver titen mishol. So now we can move to the Tosafot, and the beginning of the Tosafot says, you should know that this sugya, when it spoke about the Kutim, it spoke about the Kutim in their good times, the Kutim that were respected as Gerim. But later on, and if you go to Chulin Daf Vav, and we won't go into that right now, you'll see that changed there in Chulin Daf Vav, and the Kutim were not reviewed in the same way. So don't be surprised if you see Kutim in different sugyot acting differently. This sugya, says Tosafot, is the Kutim in their good times. Okay, so that's the beginning of the Tosafot. The Kutim in the Sugya are the Kutim before they found the image of the dove, before they were considered of the Avodah. Now let's move on to the main part of this Gefet, the Iyun that we want to do. The big machloket in Baalei HaTosafot about Melacha and Chol HaMoed. So, the Tosafot says, ומכאן יש להעביר ראיה למה שפירש רבנו תם, ושייך למימר לפני עיוור אף מידי דלת באיסורה, אלא דרבנן. והמלאכה לכל המועד אינה אסורה למדרבנן כדפירש רבנו תם. וראיה נמי מדלעיל, זה אסור למכור לישראל החשוד למכור לעובד כוכבים, אף על גב דלק האיסור אלא דרבנן. Rabbeinu Tam says, listen, in this sugya we learned something very important. The Issur of Chol HaMoed, says Rabbeinu Tam, is a sugya Rabbanan. And still, the sugya said that in Issurei de Rabbanan there's a problem of lifnei iver lo titen mishol. Rabbeinu Tam says, you, Yael, might have thought that the Issur of lifnei iver lo titen mishol is only if somebody is over an avodah d'oraisa. Only then I need to take a step back and say, oh, be careful, don't miss the avodah d'oraisa. That's when I have the Issur of lifnei iver lo titen mishol. But the Rabbanan, it's like a Zarah, so you don't do Zarah like Zarah. There's no iver lo titen mishol lifnei Issur de Rabbanan. But here, says Rabbeinu Tam, this sugya proves you wrong, because Melechet avodat Chol HaMoed is the Rabbanan, and still the sugya says specifically there's a problem of lifnei iver lo titen mishol. So that's the beginning of the Tosafot, and that's pretty convincing. But then the Tosafot doesn't stop there. The debate begins. Amar Harav Ravi Elchanan. הקשה לפירוש רבנו תם, שפירש למלאכה בחול המועד אינה אסורה מן התורה. ודאמר בפרק מי שהפך, פתח באבל וסיים בחול המועד, לא מבעיה כאמר, לא מבעיה ימי אבלו, דאסור דרבנן, אלא אפילו חול המועד דאסור מדאורייתא. רבנו אלחנן, big Baalei HaTosafot, disputes with Rabbeinu Tam and says, wait, let's go read Gemara. If you go to Moed Katan, you'll see a sugya that says, and I'm reading from the sugya, אפילו במועד איסור מלאכה מדאורייתא במקום פסיידא שרו רבנן. There in Moed Katan, the sugya talks about the difference between the Issur Melacha when somebody is sitting Shiva and the Issur Melacha in Chol HaMoed. These two are connected in many ways. We won't go into that right now. But the sugya there says there's a big difference between them. The Issur Melacha that you have when you're sitting Shiva is only midirabanan. But the Issur Melacha Moed is midiraisa, and even though it's midiraisa, they're heterim that if you're about to lose a lot of money, you are allowed to do it. So here we have a Gemara, says Rabbeinu Yochanan, that says specifically that Issur Chol HaMoed is Issur deraita. So Rabbeinu Tam, you're wrong. It is true this sugya talked about lifnei in Melacha b'Chol HaMoed, but that's because it's Issur deraita, not because it's Issur derabanan. What will Rabbeinu Tam do with this Gemara? So he does here something very, very strange. Let's see. מפרש רבנו תם, דקרא לדאורייתא לפני שיש לה אסמכתא מן התורה בפרק כמה דחגיגה, להפוקי אבל שאין לו אסמכתא אלא מדברי קבלה. דכתיב והפכתי חגיכם להבל. So says Rabbeinu Tam, listen, it's true that Moed Katan says that Chol HaMoed is Issur deraita, but it doesn't mean that seriously. Chol HaMoed is Issur deraita if you look at Evel, it looks like deraisa, because somebody who's sitting Shiva, why is he not allowed to do Melacha? Because it's written in the Navi, V'afachti chagechem le'evel. And the Navi is divrei Kabbalah. That's learning from the Navi. It does not reach the deraisa level. That's in Shiva. But Issur Chol HaMoed is not the deraisa, it's the Rabbanan, but a stronger the Rabbanan than Shiva, because the pasuk that you learn from is a pasuk from the Torah, but that's only an asmachta be'alma. In order to understand why Rabbeinu Tam is so surprising, let's read the Gemara that Rabbeinu Tam is basing himself on. In Masechet Chagiga, there are two braisos looking for psukim from the Torah to prove that Issur Chol HaMoed is midiraisa. Let's just read part of it. Says Gemara in Chagiga, Kol Melechet Avodah lo ta'asu, limed al chulo shel moed she'asur be'asiyat melacha, divrei Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi thinks that Melechet Avodah, that's where you learn that there is an Issur in Chol HaMoed. And Rabbi Akiva here has a different pasuk, and then there's another brayso for a different pasuk. So actually, this Gemara is another proof for Rabbeinu Elchanan. This is another Gemara that seems to be talking about Melacha shel Chol HaMoed in words of the Raisa. But Rabbeinu Tam says, no. When you see psukim in the Gemara, it doesn't mean it's the Raisa. It could be an asmachta. And Rabbeinu Tam says, these psukim are not serious. This is a asmachta be'alma. Still, it can explain to us, as Rabbeinu Tam, why Chol HaMoed is more the Raisa than Shiva, because Shiva is learned only from the Navi, and Chol HaMoed is the Rabbanan that learns from the Torah. But I don't know what you think. I think after we see this second Gemara, Rabbeinu Elchanan sounds much stronger than Rabbeinu Tam. So Rabbeinu Tam continues and says, I have another reason why I think you might say that Chol HaMoed looks like the Raisa, but it's not. It says Rabbeinu Tam, Chol HaMoed יש לו עיקר מן התורה דאיכא למגזרת הוא יום טוב. Okay, so that's a Zavara, but let's just sum up the Machoket. Rabbeinu Elchanan has two Gemaras on his side. The Gemara says that Melacha Chol HaMoed is the Raisa, and we saw that also in Chol HaMoed, saying specifically, and also in Chagiga that had Pesukim. So Rabbeinu Tam says, no, it doesn't mean real Deraisa, it means a relative Deraisa. It's still the Rabbanan, it's only stronger. I don't know if you were convinced, but it sounds from our Tosafot that Rabbeinu Tam here is not winning. So let's move to a different Tosafot, Masechet Chagiga, that the Tosafot here sends us to read, and then maybe we can understand Rabbeinu Tam's Shita more. So there, in Masechet Chagiga, on that Gemara with the Psukim, says the Tosafot, לכאורה משמע דמלאכה מצרה מדאורייתא. Here the Tosafot is honest. He says, I'm reading the sugya in חגיגה, it sounds as if איסור חול המועד is מדאורייתא. ומפוק לה מפסוק, וכן בפרק ב' לחול המועד, דמועד קטן, כתוב לא מבעיה מדרבנן, לחול המועד מדאורייתא, וכן פירש שם הקונטרסט. So Tosafot here opens with Rabbeinu Elchanan and says the Gemarot say that it's דאורייתא. But, וקשה לרבנו תם, ואם כן דבר העבד, בכמה מלאכות דשרין הנהתם, איך הוא נשתרו? וכי היכן מצינו איסור דאורייתא מקצתו אסור ומקצתו מותר? Now we understand what's bothering Rabbeinu Tam. Why is Rabbeinu Tam so convinced that Issur Chol HaMoed is the Rabbanan? Well, Rabbeinu Tam says, היכן מצינו איסור דאורייתא מקצתו אסור ומקצתו מותר? Rabbeinu Tam says, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's a duck, okay? This doesn't look like the Raita. It looks like the Rabbanan. Why? Because it's fluidic. Sometimes it is Asur. Sometimes it is Mutar. Where do we see Dinah the Raita act like this? This has to be the Rabbanan. So to Rabbeinu Tam. And because it has to be the Rabbanan, I'll find a way to explain this to the Gemara that say that it's the Raisa. Continues the Tosafot and say, and Rabbeinu Tam found at least 3 Gemarot that talk about Issur Rabbanan, in Masechet Megillah, in the Bavli, in the Yerushalmi, and another Daf in Moed Katam. We won't read all 3 of these, but there are 3 Gemarot here that talks about Issur Rabbanan. So now we understand that Rabbeinu Tam has a stronger case. It is true that Rabbeinu Elchanan has these 2 Gemarot that say that it's the Raita. Rabbeinu Tam has 3 Gemarot that say it's the Rabbanan, and he has a Zarah. He says it doesn't look like Issur D'Oraita, so it is not Issur D'Oraita. So the question is, how will Rabbeinu Tam deal with this? With the Zarah, Rabbeinu Elchanan can say, well, maybe you're wrong. You thought Issur D'Oraita looked like something. This teaches you that there can be an Issur D'Oraita with a different form. That's one thing he can say. And how will he deal with the Gemara? So the Tosafot brings an argument on that side, and he explained how to read the Gemara that say Chol HaMoed is mid'Rabbanan. Says the Tosafot, miu yesh lidchot, de'amicha ben melachto ha'moed kai, dehashta mi'aleka isur deoraita kevan dedavar ha'aved. Says the Tosafot, and it sounds like Rabbeinu Yochanan would say, it is true that even if you have Gemara that say that Issur Melacha Chol HaMoed is mid'Rabbanan, they might be talking about a situation that somebody is using the Torah for his own needs. Since mid'oraisa, only if you're not losing a lot of money, you can't work in your land. But if you are losing, davar ha'aved, you are allowed to work in Chol HaMoed. But what happens if somebody organizes his schedule in a way that he has to work on Chol HaMoed because he created a situation that he will lose a lot of money if he won't work on Chol HaMoed? That's Issur D'Rabbanan, says the Tosafot, and maybe that's what the Gemara are talking about. But Rabbeinu Tam continues and says, Mikol makom, mashma lefi ha'emet, velo mitzar ela mid'Rabbanan. Rabbeinu Tam says, I know, everybody can read the Gemara whatever they want, but I think lefi ha'emet, it's Issur D'Rabbanan because it doesn't look like Issur D'Oraisa. So we see the dispute, big dispute. Rabbeinu Elchanan thinks it's the D'Oraisa, and he has Gemara on his side. Rabbeinu Tam, because of his Savara, thinks it has to be the Rabbanan, and he will read all the Gemara differently. The end of that Tosafot in Chagiga says that this continued to be a bigger machloket. Ribam and Riva were also going with Rabbeinu Tam, but Rashbam went with Rabbeinu Elchanan. But now we want to finish with understanding, according to Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, he really thought that Chol HaMoed is Issur D'Rabbanan, and not only him, Riva and Ribam agreed. So when he comes to the sugya that we're learning, he says, listen, there's an Issur of lifnei iver, also an Issur D'Rabbanan. But here the Tosafot in Chagiga adds another sentence, and he explains, V'had de'amrinam gabe Kutim, v'tipuk le'mishum iver l'titen michshol b'melacha de'chol HaMoed, mishum de'smach pashta de'kra have, v'have le'tzdukim modim bo. So according to this Tosafot, it's not that any Issur D'Rabbanan has lifnei iver l'titen michshol. Only a strong Issur D'Rabbanan, like Melacha b'chol HaMoed, that has so much connection to the Torah that some of the people who read the Torah, even maybe the Kutim not, but these are drashot that the Tzdukim thought were actually written in the Torah, because Issur Melechet Chol HaMoed is not a drasha of Chazal that seems totally far-fetched. This is a drasha that is very, very much connected to what's written in the Torah. That's when you will have the Issur of lifnei and michshol. So according to this Tosafot, it's not that Rabbeinu Tam thinks that any Issurei Rabbanan have lifnei iver. Only Issurei Rabbanan, which are very strong and are very well known or very much connected to the Torah, only there you will have lifnei iver michshol. And that will have us send us to all the Issurei Rabbanan, read them through and make a decision which one of them will have lifnei iver michshol and which one of them won't. So if we sum it up this way, according to Rabbeinu Tam and Rashbam, when do you have lifnei iver? If somebody is about to be over a very, very strong issur d'oraisa. But according to Rabbeinu Tam, Riva and Ribam, lifnei iver is when somebody is about to go over something which is famous in the Torah. It doesn't matter if it's a Rabbanan or the d'oraisa, but if it's famous in the sense that somebody who would read the Torah would understand that issur, you would have that lifnei iver michshol. So this was just an opening to see that if we do go according to Rabbeinu Tam, there is in a shiur lifnei iver michshol in Issurei Rabbanan, it might not be in all Issurei Rabbanan. Okay, so we use this stuff in order to enjoy this Tosafot on the side, that I think it is very, very, very fascinating. And we saw, like a lot of times, we learned this, and there's a lot more to do. But I hope I gave you an opening to this machloket, and it's also an opportunity to remind everybody there is an Issur, Melacha, and Chol HaMoed. People nowadays don't always know that. And it's important to learn that, and you have time till Sukkot to organize yourselves and to learn more halachot of Chol HaMoed, what is Issur and what is mutar, that we won't be like the Kutim, forgot this totally. We will remember and see that this is a very important Issur, either Issur Rabbanan, which is very strong, or Issur d'oraisa. Anyway, it is a fluidic Issur, so it's a little hard. Many times you are allowed to do Melacha. It's important to know what is allowed and what is Issur. So I hope you enjoyed learning with me today, and B'ezrat Hashem, we'll meet again soon. Take care.